Okay, welcome back. I'm going to talk about 3 different types of brain disease as a way to give you some more experience working with these concepts related to cognitive neuroscience. The first is something called dementia. You may have heard dementia referred to as Alzheimer's disease. Some people call it old-timers disease. Alzheimer's disease is a degenerative disease. It kills neurons in your brain slowly over time, and the death of those neurons causes the progressive loss of memory and other cognitive functions. In the graph that I'm showing you here, or the slide that I'm showing you here, side by side you can see the picture of a healthy adult human brain next to the picture of a human brain with someone who had Alzheimer's disease. And you can see how large the valleys are, how large the sulci become, and that's because there's really massive neural loss all over the brain. We'll be talking about Alzheimer's disease several times in this class, especially when we get to the sections on memory. The second type of brain disease I want to tell you about is stroke. What is a stroke? Remember I said that while your brain only takes up 2% of your body weight, it accounts for a quarter of the calories that you consume, takes a quarter of the energy to run your brain. What your brain needs to work is glucose. And that glucose is distributed by the blood vessels that run on top of and through your brain. If a stroke is like a plumbing problem, if something goes wrong with the blood vessels that inhibits or slows the ability of glucose to get to the nerve cells in your brain, without that glucose, your nerve cells are going to die. And that's a stroke. There's 2 different kinds of strokes or 2 different kinds of problems that can happen to the blood vessels in your brain. The most common, 90% of the time, is a blockage. It's when something stops the blood from flowing, literally physically blocks the blood from flowing in the blood vessels. And the second, rarer type of stroke comes from a blood vessel that leaks. So the blood not much of the blood goes down the blood vessel because it's leaking out of the blood vessel and into the area outside of your brain. You can see a picture of the 2 different kinds of strokes here. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see a brain image, but also a physical specimen of a brain of somebody who had a massive stroke in their right hemisphere, in the right half of their brain. The third type of brain disease I want to talk to you about is traumatic brain injury. It is the most common kind of brain disease that occurs in young people, and it's said to occur when you have been hit in the head very hard or repeatedly, and that being hit in the head causes your brain to swell. And when your brain swells, it can only swell so far because we have this thick skull. So the brain, when it's been insulted or traumatized, it expands. It tries to expand to deal with that. When it tries to expand, it gets pushed up against the skull, and that pushing can that's not good for neurons. That can lead to cell death. You can also think of the problem. Okay, I should go back. The damage that happens to your brain is widespread. Why? Well, maybe I get hit in the head here, but that pressure causes my brain to get pushed back. The force of it pushes my brain back against the back of my skull, and then my brain bounces back and hits the front of the skull. So if you put an egg in a glass and shook it, the egg would be damaged on all sides. That's what happens when your brain experiences a major force against it. The damage is very widespread. People who have experienced repeated trauma, repeated hits to the brain, develop something called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. It's much easier to say. CTE is a progressive degenerative disease. It was first identified actually 100 years ago in boxers. When boxers got hit too often, they were described as being punch drunk. They looked like they were drunk. They couldn't get around very well. They made poor decisions. They had all sorts of problems that drunks have. Symptoms, the first sort of symptoms that people see in CTE are difficulties controlling your impulses, a lot of aggressive behavior, poor reasoning and decision making. CTE is prevalent in football players in the NFL. A lot of NFL players are now donating their brains upon their death to laboratories that study CTE, and a shocking number of those athletes have been found to have brains with massive cell death in it. The slide shows a picture of a football player by the name of Aaron Hernandez, who's an amazing football player for the New England Patriots. He also was a convicted murderer. He committed suicide while he was in prison, and when his family donated his brain to research. And when the researchers took a look at his brain, they were shocked by the massive amount of brain loss, neural loss that there was in Aaron Hernandez's brain, which, it's hard to know. Correlation is not causation, but it may have had something to do, this traumatic injuries to Aaron Hernandez's brain may have had something to do with why he made such dumb decisions that ended up in the death of other people and his conviction and imprisonment. So those are 3 classes of bad things that can happen to your brain, and that is the end of lecture 3. And so students in my class, head back to Canvas now and start working on the activities, and then take the quizzes after you study the slides from this lecture. Take care and be good to your brain.